The welcome home. That wasn't the fluorescent lights of the arrivals hall hummed, a flat, incessant drone that did little to calm the flutter in Noah's stomach. He shifted his weight, the edge of his handmade sign digging slightly into his hip. "Welcome home, Daniel," it declared in bold, slightly crooked blue letters, framed by two hastily drawn, surprisingly cheerful yellow stars. He'd spent an embarrassingly long time on it last night, each stroke a small act of anticipation. Around him, families shrieked with joy. Children sprinted into open arms, and a cacophony of greetings filled the air. Noah felt a familiar, self-conscious flush creep up his neck. He wasn't typically one for grand gestures, but for Daniel, he'd braved the spectacle. Every face that emerged from the gate was scanned, every silhouette assessed. Was that him? No. Too tall. Too short. Not the right gait. He chewed on his lower lip, the metallic taste of nerves sharp on his tongue. It had been what felt like an eternity, though the calendar insisted it was only 2 years. 2 years of terse emails, crackly phone calls, and the constant dull ache of absence. He'd pictured this moment 1,000 times. Daniel's easy smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the sheer relief of having him back on solid ground. Then he saw him, not quite as he'd imagined, but undeniably Daniel. A little thinner, maybe, a new hardness around his jaw, but the same unruly dark hair, the same determined set to his shoulders. A rucksack sat heavy on his back, a duffel bag clutched in one hand. Their eyes met across the throng. A slow, incredulous smile spread across Daniel's face, chasing away the weariness. He dropped his bags without a second thought, pushing through the crowd with a single-minded purpose. Noah barely had time to brace himself before Daniel was there, engulfing him in an embrace that stole his breath. It was rough, powerful, and utterly real. And Daniel's arms were iron bands, squeezing him tight, his face buried in Noah's shoulder. The scent of him, sun-baked fabric, a hint of something metallic, and the familiar comforting musk that was uniquely Daniel, filled Noah's senses. A grounding force after so much uncertainty. "Noah." Daniel's voice was a low rumble against his ear, thick with emotion. "You actually came." "Of course I came," Noah managed, his own voice surprisingly steady despite the lump in his throat. He held on tighter, feeling the solid reality of Daniel's body against his, the steady thrum of his heartbeat. This was it. He was back. The drive to Daniel's apartment was a blur of hopeful chatter. Daniel, usually guarded, spoke with an uncharacteristic openness. He talked about his plans, about finding a new job, about putting down roots. "Mark and I," he'd begun, his voice softening, "we're going to finally get that garden started. Maybe even adopt a dog, something big and clumsy that sheds everywhere." He laughed, a sound Noah hadn't realized he'd missed so desperately. Just a fresh start, you know, away from everything. Noah listened, interjecting with encouraging murmurs, a warm glow spreading through him. He saw the apartment building come into view, a brick structure that had always seemed a bit too nondescript for Daniel's vibrant personality. But today, even it seemed to gleam under the late afternoon sun. As Daniel slowed the car to turn into the small parking lot, a metallic blue sedan, unfamiliar and sleek, was parked in Daniel's usual spot. A flicker of unease went through Noah, but he dismissed it. Maybe Mark had a new car. Daniel frowned, a small crease appearing between his brows. "Huh. Don't recognize that one. Mark must have a friend over." He sounded slightly annoyed, perhaps at the inconvenience of having to park further away. They hauled the bags out of Noah's car, Daniel's initial excitement slowly giving way to a more subdued anticipation as they approached the front door. The blue sedan's presence felt heavier now, more insistent. Daniel fumbled with his keys, a faint, muffled laugh escaping from inside the apartment, followed by another, distinct from Mark's. The key slid into the lock, a sharp click echoing in the sudden silence of the hallway. Daniel pushed the door open, the welcoming warmth he expected to find inside replaced by an immediate, jarring stillness. The air was thick with a cloying sweetness, the scent of a floral candle mixing with something else, something cloyingly intimate. Mark was there, all right. On the sofa, entangled with a stranger, a man with sandy hair and a startled deer-in-headlights expression. The remote control lay forgotten on the coffee table. The soft glow of the television illuminated their naked shoulders. Daniel's duffel bag hit the floor with a dull thud, the sound shockingly loud in the sudden, agonizing quiet. His face, which only moments ago had been alight with hope, crumpled. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him ashen. His eyes, fixed on the scene before him, were wide with a raw, uncomprehending pain. "Daniel!" Mark choked out, scrambling to cover himself, his face a mask of mortification. The sandy-haired man bolted upright, clutching a pillow to his chest. But Daniel didn't seem to hear him. He just stood there, framed in the doorway, the vibrant future he'd painted so eagerly only moments ago shattering around him. The carefully constructed optimism, the resilience he'd honed over years of hardship, evaporated, leaving behind a stark, gaping wound. Noah felt a cold dread settle in his gut. The welcome home he'd so carefully orchestrated had just become a devastating farewell to everything Daniel thought he was returning to, a quiet refuge. The cloying perfume of stale air and cheap cologne enveloped Daniel. He stood transfixed, the garish "Welcome home" sign still clenched in his fist, a mocking counterpoint to the scene unfolding. Mark, partially clothed and partially concealed, and the equally rumpled stranger, slowly disentangled, their expressions a blend of guilt and irritation. The vibrant hope that had just blossomed within Daniel shriveled, leaving a sharp, bitter aftertaste. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sudden, profound vacuum that had swallowed everything. He let the sign fall. The flimsy cardboard landed with a soft thud that reverberated like a pistol shot in the abrupt silence. He couldn't speak. The words he'd rehearsed, the future he'd meticulously constructed, all dissolved into a meaningless cacophony. He simply pivoted, his movements rigid, almost mechanized. Noah, a hopeful presence moments before, now felt like a distant, sympathetic witness. A cold dread seeped into Noah's bones as he watched Daniel exit. No backward glance, no word exchanged with the man who had just fractured his world. Noah followed, a silent shadow. The elevator's descent was punctuated only by its soft mechanical hum and the frantic beat of Noah's own heart. Outside, the city thrummed with a careless indifference that felt jarringly out of sync. Daniel didn't hail a taxi or a rideshare. He simply walked, shoulders hunched, his duffel bag a dead weight at his side. He moved with the slow, deliberate gait of a man navigating a minefield, each step a testament to internal devastation. Noah's voice, when it finally pierced the suffocating quiet, was soft but resolute. "Daniel, my place. It's small, but it's safe." Daniel paused, but didn't turn. His head gave a barely perceptible nod. The only acknowledgement Noah received, but it was enough. Noah hailed a cab, providing his own address, and they rode in silence, the unspoken understanding a heavy shroud between them. Noah's apartment, a snug one-bedroom nestled on the third floor of an old brownstone, starkly contrasted with the sterile modern space Daniel had just abandoned. Bookshelves overflowed with well-loved paperbacks. A soft throw draped over the sofa's back, and the faint aroma of cinnamon and aged paper permeated the air. It was a sanctuary of quiet comfort. Noah gestured to the small spare room, little more than an alcove with a twin bed and a slender dresser. "You can have this. I'll take the couch." Daniel walked in, dropped his duffel bag in the corner, and settled onto the bed's edge. He didn't unpack. Didn't even remove his shoes. He just sat, staring at the muted floral wallpaper, his gaze utterly vacant. The silence that settled between them was profound. An almost palpable entity filling every corner of the apartment. It wasn't awkward, but rather a deep, shared sorrow. Noah lingered in the doorway for a moment, then retreated to the kitchen to make tea. The gentle clinking of mugs, the soft whistle of the kettle. These were the only sounds brave enough to disturb the stillness. Days blurred into a seamless, silent continuum. Daniel rarely emerged from the small room. He consumed the food Noah placed before him, drank the water, but his eyes remained hollow, his movements languid. He didn't utter a sound, not even a whisper. Noah initially attempted a few gentle inquiries. "Are you hungry? Do you need anything?" But Daniel's silence was absolute, an impenetrable wall. Noah watched him, a knot of helplessness tightening in his chest. He would sit in the living room, feigning to read, yet his attention was perpetually drawn to the closed door of the spare room. He'd hear the faint creak of the bed, the occasional shuffle of movement, and his heart would ache with fierce protective tenderness. He longed to mend the shattered fragments of Daniel's world, but he knew he couldn't. All he could do was be there, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. He ensured there was always fresh coffee, always a meal, always a quiet presence. He didn't press. He didn't demand. He simply existed, a tranquil harbor in the storm. The apartment, usually vibrant with Noah's own quiet rhythms, now felt heavy with Daniel's unspoken pain, a shared burden that settled deep within Noah's own soul. Whispers of the past. The aroma of toasted sourdough and melting cheddar filled Noah's small kitchen, a comforting scent that usually brought Daniel bounding from the living room. Today, only silence answered. Noah carefully plated the grilled cheese, slicing it diagonally, just the way Daniel liked it. He carried the plate into the living room, placing it gently on the coffee table beside Daniel, who sat hunched on the sofa, eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point. "Just a little something," Noah murmured, his voice soft, almost a whisper against the heavy quiet. He sat in the armchair opposite, not pushing, just existing in the space. Daniel didn't stir. His gaze remained vacant, his shoulders still slumped with the weight of an invisible burden. Hours bled into one another. Noah made tea, then a light broth, each offering met with the same profound stillness. He talked about his day, about a ridiculous email from his boss, about the neighbor's cat that had somehow scaled the fence again. He spoke of mundane things, hoping to weave a thread of normalcy into Daniel's shattered world. "Remember that time, back in 6th grade?" Noah started, a faint smile touching his lips. "When Mrs. Henderson made us do that group project on the solar system, and you somehow convinced her that Pluto was actually a giant space potato that orbited the sun in a very shy, secretive way." A flicker, a barely perceptible twitch at the corner of Daniel's mouth. Noah pressed on, encouraged. "She actually believed you for a solid 2 minutes, until Mark piped up and corrected her with a textbook definition. You were furious. Said he ruined your artistic interpretation." This time, a sound escaped Daniel, a dry, choked gasp that almost sounded like a laugh, immediately followed by a sharp intake of breath, as if the effort had pained him. His eyes, though still distant, held a fragile glaze. He always was a bit of a stickler for facts, wasn't he? Daniel's voice was a raspy whisper, unused, brittle. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken context. The mention of Mark's name brought a fresh wave of grief to Daniel's face, pulling the faint smile into a grimace of agony. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands clenching into fists on his lap. He was always so certain, so sure. He trailed off, the raw pain in his voice too much for him to bear, and he retreated once more into his silent fortress. Noah watched him, his own heart aching. He yearned to reach out, to pull Daniel into an embrace, but he knew Daniel wasn't ready. He needed space, time to process the betrayal that had ripped his world apart. So, Noah simply nodded, acknowledging the pain without demanding its expansion. Later that evening, after the last rays of sunset had faded, Noah retrieved a worn leather-bound photo album from a shelf in his bedroom. It was filled with snapshots of their shared history. Awkward childhood haircuts, grinning faces covered in ice cream, blurry images from high school dances, and countless candid moments from their early 20s before life had begun to pull them in different directions. He thumbed through the pages, a bittersweet warmth spreading through him. He paused at a picture of them, barely teenagers, arms slung around each other's shoulders, sun-kissed and oblivious to the complexities that adulthood would bring. Daniel's smile was wide, unburdened. Noah placed the album carefully on the coffee table, directly in front of where Daniel had been sitting for most of the day. He didn't say anything. He just left it there, a silent invitation. A tangible reminder of a past where joy was simpler, and their bond was an unbreakable constant. He hoped the images, the echoes of laughter and innocent mischief, might be a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness Daniel found himself trapped within. He retired to his room, leaving Daniel to the quiet company of their memories, trusting that Daniel would find solace in the whispers of their past. The cracks begin to show. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed a persistent amber 2:17 a.m. Noah had long since given up on sleep. He sat on the edge of the armchair, the ancient fabric sighing under his weight, watching the subtle rise and fall of Daniel's chest. The photo album lay open on Daniel's lap, the glossy pages reflecting the dim light from the hallway, a silent testament to a life that had once been vibrant and whole. Daniel's gaze was fixed on a faded snapshot of the three of them: Mark, Daniel, and Noah. Mud-splattered and beaming after a particularly disastrous attempt at building a treehouse. A soft sniffle broke the oppressive quiet. He told me he loved me," Daniel rasped, his voice thick with unshed tears. The words, forced past the obstruction in his throat, were barely audible. "Every night before I deployed, he promised. A fresh start, a house, kids. He even picked out names." A tremor ran through him, shaking the open album. "And when I came back, she was there, in our bed." The dam broke. Tears, hot and stinging, carved paths down Daniel's gaunt cheeks, tracing the lines of exhaustion and grief. He didn't try to hide them, didn't flinch from the raw display of pain. His hands, usually so strong and steady, trembled as he clutched the album to his chest, as if seeking solace in the paper memories. Noah didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes. He simply moved from the armchair to the edge of the bed, a silent, comforting presence. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before gently resting on Daniel's shoulder. The warmth seeped through Daniel's thin shirt, a grounding anchor in a sea of despair. Daniel leaned into the touch, a small, almost imperceptible shift that spoke volumes. He wept, long, shuddering sobs that racked his body, purging some of the poison that had festered within him. Hours later, the storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile quiet. Daniel's eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, but the frantic edge had dulled. He was calmer, though still heartbroken. Noah had retrieved a warm mug of chamomile tea, its herbal scent filling the room, and sat patiently while Daniel slowly sipped it. "The army," Daniel began, his voice raspy but clearer now. "It was supposed to be a stepping stone. Get the experience, save some money, come home, and build something real. Mark, he was always so good at seeing the big picture. He'd say, 'You're going to be a damn good contractor, Danny. Build bridges, not just houses.' He always believed in me." A faint, melancholic smile touched his lips. "I even had a blueprint in my head for our first house. A big porch, a fireplace for winter nights, a yard big enough for a dog." His gaze drifted to the window, lost in the pre-dawn murk. Everything shattered, Noah. Everything I thought I was building. Noah listened, his gaze unwavering, a silent promise of understanding in his eyes. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. He simply bore witness to Daniel's unraveling, a steadfast rock in the tumultuous waters. I don't know what to do now, Daniel admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It's like I don't even know who I am anymore, outside of that future. All those plans, all those hopes. Gone. A comfortable silence settled between them, not empty, but filled with the unspoken weight of shared history and newfound vulnerability. The air, once heavy with Daniel's grief, now held a delicate balance of sorrow and a burgeoning sense of connection. The sky outside began to lighten, a faint blush of rose and lavender painting the eastern horizon. Daniel eventually leaned back against the headboard, the mug held loosely in his hands, his gaze fixed on Noah. A flicker of something akin to peace, however fleeting, softened his features. Noah met his gaze, a quiet strength emanating from him. In that moment, surrounded by the dawn and the lingering echoes of a painful confession, Daniel felt a faint shift, a subtle lessening of the unbearable pressure. The cracks had begun to show, not just in Daniel's carefully constructed walls, but in the thick shell of his isolation, allowing a sliver of light, and perhaps a path forward. Comfort in routine. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of the chef's knife against the cutting board was the loudest sound in Noah's kitchen. Daniel, his shoulders still slumped, was meticulously slicing bell peppers into even strips. It had been weeks since the initial explosion of grief, and a new, quieter rhythm had settled into their days. Evenings, in particular, had become a comforting ritual. Need a hand with that, or are you aiming for culinary perfection? Noah teased gently, leaning against the counter, a glass of water in his hand. He watched Daniel's focused brow, the way his jaw was still tight. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Daniel's lips. Just trying to make sure your stir-fry doesn't look like a toddler made it. He glanced up, and for a fleeting moment, a spark of the old Daniel flickered in his eyes. Though, given some of your past attempts, that might be an improvement. Noah feigned a wounded expression. Hey, my culinary journey is a work in progress. Unlike, say, your impeccable knife skills. He nudged Daniel playfully with his elbow, and Daniel actually chuckled. A soft, rusty sound that warmed Noah's chest more than any compliment. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the scent of fresh vegetables mingling with the faint aroma of garlic and ginger Noah had already sautéed. Noah watched Daniel, noting the subtle improvements. The dark circles under his eyes were less pronounced, his movements a little less sluggish. He was still a long way from whole, but the raw edges of his pain were beginning to soften. Later, full and content, they migrated to the living room. Noah settled into his armchair, a dog-eared paperback resting on his lap. Daniel, after a moment of hesitation, chose the other armchair, pulling a thick history book from the small stack Noah had offered him. The only light came from a soft floor lamp, casting a warm glow on the pages and the quiet space between them. The silence was companionable, punctuated only by the rustle of pages turning and the gentle hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Noah found himself not reading, but observing Daniel. The way his brow furrowed slightly in concentration, the quiet intensity with which he absorbed the words. It was a comfortable scene, one that had become surprisingly familiar. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two men existing peacefully in the same space. A sudden, unexpected laugh from Daniel startled Noah from his reverie. Daniel was no longer reading, but staring at the television screen, where an old black-and-white movie was playing on low volume. It was some slapstick comedy from the 50s, a blurry figure slipping on a banana peel. Daniel's shoulders shook with a silent laugh. And then, he let out another, fuller sound, a genuine, unforced laugh that seemed to chase away some of the shadows clinging to him. Noah smiled, watching him. "What's so funny?" he asked, though he already knew. The movie was ridiculous, in the best possible way. Daniel wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. He just did it again, he gasped between laughs, pointing at the screen. The same banana peel. You'd think he'd learn. Noah chuckled, leaning back. Some people never learn, Dan. It's part of their charm. Their shared laughter filled the room, a warm, resonant sound that momentarily eclipsed the grief that had permeated the house for so long. Daniel eventually quieted, but a lingering smile remained on his face. He looked at Noah, his eyes still shining with mirth, and then something else. Something soft and unguarded. A profound sense of peace settled over Daniel. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was a quiet contentment he hadn't felt in what felt like a lifetime. Here, in Noah's home, with Noah's steady presence, the world outside faded. The betrayal, the broken dreams, the sharp edges of his pain, they were still there, but they were distant, muffled. With Noah, he felt safe. He felt seen. And in these quiet, ordinary moments, he realized he felt something akin to belonging. It was a strange, unexpected realization, a tiny seed of warmth blooming in the barren landscape of his heart. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel didn't immediately shy away from the feeling. Facing the past, together. The day loomed, a dark cloud on Daniel's otherwise slowly brightening horizon. "It's today, isn't it?" he asked Noah over lukewarm coffee, the words tight in his throat. The old apartment, the one he'd shared with Mark, still held the bulk of his life, frozen in time like a museum of a shattered past. Noah simply nodded, his gaze unwavering, a silent anchor in the turbulent waters of Daniel's apprehension. The drive was punctuated by Daniel's shallow breaths. Each turn of the wheel a step closer to a place he both craved and dreaded. The familiar street, the slightly chipped brickwork of the building. It all hit him with a visceral force. He fumbled with the keys, his hand shaking slightly as he unlocked the door. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of forgotten memories. Noah stepped in first, his presence a comforting shield against the ghosts of what had been. "Where do you want to start?" he asked, his voice calm, practical. Daniel gestured vaguely towards the living room, the space where so much of their life had unfolded. He started with the books, carefully sliding them into boxes, trying to focus on the task rather than the myriad annotations in Mark's familiar hand. Noah, meanwhile, systematically tackled the kitchen, methodically packing away dishes and utensils, his movements quiet and efficient. Hours blurred into a haze of packing tape and cardboard. Daniel unearthed a small leather-bound photo album tucked beneath a stack of old magazines. His fingers trembled as he opened it. There they were, Daniel and Mark, arms slung around each other on a sun-drenched beach, their faces alight with a joy that now seemed impossibly distant. Another showed them laughing over a poorly cooked dinner, flour dusting their cheeks. A sharp pang, not entirely grief, but a bittersweet ache, twisted in his gut. He traced Mark's smiling face with his thumb, a single tear escaping to land on the glossy surface. Noah, noticing Daniel's stillness, paused his work. He didn't say anything, just moved closer, resting a hand gently on Daniel's shoulder. The simple contact was enough. Daniel closed the album, tucking it into a box of personal effects, a silent acknowledgement that some memories, however painful, still deserved a place. Just as the last box in the living room was taped shut, a cheerful rap echoed from the front door. Noah answered it, revealing Aunt Carol, her arms laden with a wicker basket. Her eyes, warm and knowing, took in the scene. "I thought you boys might be needing a little sustenance," she said, her voice a balm. She placed the basket on the kitchen counter, unveiling a bounty of her famous lemon poppy seed muffins and a thermos of steaming herbal tea. "Looks like you've made good progress, honey," she said. her gaze settling on Daniel. She pulled him into a soft hug, her scent of lavender and cinnamon a familiar comfort. It's hard, isn't it, letting go of the past? She held him at arm's length, her eyes searching his. But sometimes, letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about making space for something new, something better. Daniel managed a watery smile. It feels heavy, he admitted, gesturing to the stacks of boxes. Aunt Carol nodded sagely. Of course it does. It's a part of you. But you're not defined by it, Daniel. You're defined by what you choose to do next. And you've got good people in your corner. Her gaze shifted subtly to Noah, a silent message passing between them. Take your time with it all. And don't be afraid to lean on those who care about you. That's what family's for, blood or otherwise. Her words, gentle yet firm, resonated deeply. Daniel felt a lightness begin to seep into his chest, a subtle shift in the oppressive weight he'd been carrying. As Aunt Carol chatted with Noah about community gossip, Daniel picked up a muffin, the sweet citrus cutting through the lingering bitterness in his mouth. He looked at Noah, then at Aunt Carol, and for the first time in a long time, the prospect of something new didn't feel terrifying. It felt possible. He even managed a genuine, albeit small, laugh when Aunt Carol recounted Mrs. Henderson's latest escapade at the bingo hall. The apartment was still full of echoes, but now a new kind of sound was beginning to fill the space. The sound of healing and the quiet comfort of shared presence. A new foundation. The crisp autumn air held a promise of change, a subtle shift that mirrored the tentative hope blooming within Daniel. He adjusted the knot of his tie, the silk feeling foreign against his skin, a relic from a life he was slowly dismantling. The interview panel, 3 stern faces behind a polished mahogany table, seemed less intimidating than the mountains of Mark's belongings he'd tackled. He spoke of his experience with a newfound clarity, the grief a dull ache rather than a crippling weight, his focus unwavering on the potential of a blank slate. He left the building feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in months, the sun a warm blessing on his face. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed. He saw the unfamiliar number and answered with a hesitant breath. The voice on the other end was professional, congratulatory. Daniel's heart gave a jolt, a genuine surge of elation. He had the job. A financial analyst position, exactly what he needed, a tangible step forward. His first instinct was to call Noah. I got it, Daniel said, the words tumbling out in a rush, a wide smile breaking across his face. He heard the genuine pleasure in Noah's answering congratulations, a warmth that settled deep within him. That's fantastic, Daniel. We're celebrating tonight. My place. Something simple, but celebratory. True to his word, Noah had a modest feast waiting. Store-bought rotisserie chicken, a fresh salad, and a bottle of sparkling cider. The flickering candlelight cast soft shadows, making Noah's apartment feel intimate and cozy. Daniel watched Noah across the small table, the way his brow furrowed slightly in concentration as he poured the cider, the easy curve of his smile. They talked about the new job, the responsibilities, the commute. Daniel found himself dissecting the details with an enthusiasm he hadn't thought possible. It's good, isn't it? Noah observed, his gaze steady. To have something new to focus on. Daniel nodded, taking a sip of the cider. More than good. It feels like breathing again, like I'm not just treading water. He paused, a different thought emerging. It's funny. When everything fell apart, I couldn't imagine ever feeling this way again. This anticipation. He gestured vaguely with his hand. Noah simply listened, his presence a quiet affirmation. Daniel found himself looking forward to these evenings more and more. The easy companionship, the shared meals, the comfortable silences. He realized he sought Noah out, not just for comfort, but for the simple joy of being in his presence. Each day felt incomplete until he'd heard Noah's voice, seen his face. It was a subtle shift, but a profound one. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Daniel was helping Noah clear the table. He picked up a stack of plates, their edges cool beneath his fingers. Noah reached for a glass, their hands brushing. A spark, not electric, but warm and steady, passed between them. Daniel looked at Noah, really looked at him. The kindness in his eyes, the strength in his posture, the unwavering support that had been his constant through the storm. A sudden, clear thought blossomed in Daniel's mind, startling him with its intensity. He had been adrift, tossed by the waves of grief and betrayal, and Noah had been his anchor. Not just a temporary port in a storm, but the steady, unchanging haven he had always needed. He felt a profound sense of safety, a feeling he hadn't fully recognized until this moment. It wasn't just about moving on from Mark. It was about moving towards something, towards someone, who made him feel whole. He realized he had stopped talking, lost in the quiet epiphany. Noah turned, a questioning look in his eyes. "Everything okay?" Noah asked, his voice soft. Daniel simply nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. "Everything's more than okay, Noah," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. "Everything's finally safe." He didn't elaborate, and Noah, with his characteristic understanding, didn't press. But in that moment, standing in Noah's warm kitchen, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true safe harbor. The world outside might still be uncertain, but here, with Noah, a new foundation was being laid, brick by steady brick. The panic sets. In the pungent scent of garlic and herbs, a familiar comfort, perfumed Daniel's small kitchen. It was a fragrance inextricably linked to Noah's presence. Tonight, a new pasta dish, Noah's experimental whim, filled the air with anticipation. Their easy chatter, a melody Daniel hadn't realized had been absent from his life, flowed effortlessly. Laughter, light and genuine, frequently punctuated their rhythm, particularly when Noah playfully flicked a strand of spaghetti at him. Daniel, parrying with a spoon, caught Noah's wrist in the process. A fleeting brush of skin that ignited an undeniable spark. A smile, pure and unfiltered, bloomed across Daniel's face. He felt a profound security, a sense he hadn't known since Mark's cruel deception. His challenging yet rewarding new role at Northwood Financial thrived. And evenings like this, steeped in Noah's warmth, felt like the universe righting its tilted axis. This was it, he mused, a deep contentment settling within him. This was what healing tasted like. Yet, as the feeling solidified, a sharp, cold current jolted him. It was the visceral plunge of a roller coaster's drop. Happiness. So vibrant moments before, curdling into a sickly dread. His hand retracted swiftly, almost imperceptibly, his smile faltering. He found himself staring at the simmering sauce, its bubbling surface now an unseeing canvas. The kitchen's warmth, once inviting, now felt suffocating. The echoing laughter, precarious, dependent. Later that night, long after Noah had departed, Daniel lay awake, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Panic had rooted itself deep in his thoughts. He replayed every shared laugh, every casual touch, every nuanced glance, each memory, instead of soothing, now fueling a fresh wave of anxiety. He was leaning too heavily on Noah, he concluded. He was dependent. The word, once a tender descriptor of their growing connection, now tolled like a death knell. He'd clung to Mark too, and the outcome had been utter devastation. The mere thought of entrusting so much of his fragile self, his reconstructed trust, to another person again, was terrifying. What if Noah, like Mark, eventually departed? What if this beautiful, nascent connection shattered? He simply couldn't endure that again. Sleep remained an elusive phantom, replaced by a churning sea of apprehension. The ensuing days blurred into a series of forced smiles and artful dodges. Noah's suggestion of a movie night was met with an urgent need to tackle pressing paperwork from his new job. A proposed hike conveniently coincided with a sudden, nagging knee pain. He began to linger at the office, even when the workload didn't strictly demand it, finding a perverse solace in the sterile quiet of his cubicle. That silence, though devoid of life, felt immeasurably safer than the vibrant, potentially volatile energy he shared with Noah. A gnawing guilt, a sharp pang of regret, pricked him each time he witnessed the fleeting flicker of disappointment in Noah's eyes. But fear, a formidable shield, proved stronger, protecting him from a pain he was convinced was inevitable. Noah, initially patient and understanding, eventually sensed the shift. He called one evening, his voice edged with a confusion Daniel could practically feel. "Hey, is everything all right? You've been a bit remote lately." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. "Absolutely, just swamped with this new project. It's a lot, you know? Really trying to impress." He hoped his voice carried conviction. A beat of silence stretched on the other end, just a fraction too long. "Right. Of course. Well, let me know if you need anything. Or if you just want to talk." His tone was gentle, but the undercurrent of bewilderment was unmistakable. "Will do," Daniel said quickly, perhaps too quickly. He ended the call, the phone a weighty presence in his hand, a tangible symbol of the chasm he was actively carving between them. The panic, though still present, now mingled with a bitter taste of regret. He was pushing away the very person who had pulled him from the depths, yet he remained trapped, unable to halt the self-destructive course. The terror of being broken again was simply too profound. Growing distance. The sharp chime of Daniel's phone sliced through the gentle hum of Noah's apartment. A text, direct and unadorned. "Hey, dinner tonight." Noah typed his reply, a smile blossoming as he envisioned Daniel's thoughtful expression. An almost instant response arrived, a blunt volley of words that struck him like a cold spray. "Can't make it. Got a thing." No explanation, no hint of rescheduling, just a dismissive brevity that pricked at Noah's composure. He stared at the screen, his smile dissolving. A thing? Daniel usually offered a detail, however vague. A smiley face, at the very least an apology. A knot of unease began to tighten in Noah's stomach. The next day, Noah discovered Daniel hunched over a book in their shared study, the lamp casting a soft halo around his absorbed profile. "Everything all right?" Noah ventured, leaning against the doorframe. Daniel flinched, as if jolted from a deep reverie. He looked up, his gaze a little distant. "Yeah, fine. Just reading." His voice was flat, shorn of its usual warmth. Noah pressed gently. "You've been a bit quiet lately. Is something bothering you?" Daniel merely shrugged, retreating behind his book. "No, just tired. Long week." The words felt like gritty sandpaper, rough and unyielding. The conversation dissipated, leaving only the rustle of turning pages and a widening gulf of silence between them. Noah withdrew, a distinct chill permeating his bones despite the room's warmth. Later that afternoon, Noah was shelving books in the hushed aisles of the university library when Leo materialized beside him, a precarious stack of returned novels in his arms. "Hey, you look a bit down," Leo observed, his usually booming voice subdued to a respectful library whisper. "Everything okay?" Noah sighed, pushing a heavy volume into its slot with more force than necessary. "I don't know, Leo. Daniel's been off." He glanced around, confirming their privacy before continuing. "He's been cancelling plans, barely talking. It's like he's walled himself off." Leo's brow furrowed. "That's not like Daniel. He's usually so engaged. After everything he went through, you two were inseparable. Noah nodded, a fresh wave of bewilderment washing over him. Exactly. And now it's like he's actively sidestepping me. I asked him if everything was okay yesterday, and he just gave me some vague excuse about being tired. It felt like he couldn't wait for me to leave the room. The memory stung, a sharp pang in his chest. He'd tried to extend a hand, to bridge the expanding chasm, but Daniel had only receded further, like a snail into its shell. Maybe he's just swamped with work, Leo offered, though his tone hinted at his own skepticism. Or maybe he needs space. Space is one thing, Noah countered, frustration lacing his voice. But this feels like something else. It feels like he's actively pushing me away. He recalled Daniel's faraway gaze, the subtle tensing of his shoulders when Noah had tried to touch his arm. This sudden withdrawal was a stark contrast to the easy intimacy they had cultivated over the past months. Just weeks ago, Daniel's hand had sought his out in silent reassurance. Now, he barely met Noah's eyes. The joy he'd felt had been replaced by a gnawing anxiety, a fear that the fragile connection they had built was unraveling, thread by painful thread. A familiar ache, a dull throb of hurt and confusion, settled deep in his chest. He didn't understand. He thought they were past this. He thought they were building something real. But Daniel's actions, or lack thereof, were whispering an entirely different narrative. The difficult truth. The book lay open on Daniel's lap, its pages unread for the last half hour. His gaze was fixed on the condensation ring a forgotten glass of water had left on the bedside table. But he saw none of it. All he saw was Noah's face, etched with a confusion that had slowly morphed into hurt with each passing day. The guilt was a lead weight in his stomach, churning with every memory of a cancelled dinner, a curt text, a hurried excuse. He'd seen the worry in Noah's eyes, the way his brows furrowed when Daniel pulled back, and it twisted a knife in his gut. He knew he couldn't put it off any longer. The silence between them had become a chasm, and Daniel was terrified of what would happen if he let it widen further. He pushed himself off the bed, the sudden movement rattling the mental cage he'd built around himself. His phone felt like a brick in his hand as he scrolled to Noah's contact. Each ring was a hammer blow to his conscience. Daniel. Noah's voice, tentative and laced with a weariness Daniel hadn't heard before, sent a fresh wave of shame through him. Hey, Daniel managed, his own voice sounding rougher than he intended. Can you come over? We need to talk. A pause stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Are you okay? Noah asked, the concern battling with an underlying tension. I will be, Daniel said, closing his eyes. Just, please come. He heard Noah sigh, a soft exhalation that spoke volumes. I'll be there in 20. The 20 minutes crawled by, each second amplified by the frantic beat of Daniel's heart. He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair, rehearsing explanations that felt flimsy even to him. When the knock finally came, it was soft, hesitant. Daniel opened the door to find Noah standing there, hands shoved into his pockets, his posture stiff. The easy smile that usually lit his face was absent, replaced by a guarded expression that made Daniel's chest ache. Come in, Daniel murmured, stepping aside. Noah walked past him, heading straight for the sofa. He didn't sit, though, just stood in the center of the room, his eyes scanning Daniel's face with an intensity that felt like an interrogation. The silence was suffocating, thick with unspoken anxieties. Noah, I'm so sorry, Daniel began, the words tumbling out in a rush. I've been an asshole. I know. Noah's jaw tensed. You have been distant, yes, he said, his voice carefully neutral, though Daniel could detect the tremor beneath. You've been pushing me away, and I don't understand why. Daniel swallowed hard, the taste of ash in his mouth. It's It's complicated. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet Noah's gaze. No, that's a lie. It's not complicated. It's me. I'm scared. Noah's eyes, which had been narrowed in a mixture of hurt and frustration, softened almost imperceptibly. Scared of what, Daniel? His voice was quieter now, laced with a genuine plea for understanding. Scared of this. Daniel gestured vaguely between them, his hand shaking slightly. Of us. Of how much I feel when I'm with you. The confession felt like ripping a band-aid off a wound, raw and exposed. After Mark, after everything, I don't know how to do this. How to feel this much again. He looked away, unable to bear the pained expression he saw blossoming on Noah's face. I'm afraid of being dependent, of needing someone so much that if they left, I'd fall apart again. He squeezed his eyes shut. I'm afraid of feeling safe, of feeling like myself. Because it's all so new, and it's all so good. And I don't know what to do with good things anymore. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by Daniel's ragged breathing. When he finally dared to look at Noah again, he saw a complex mix of emotions warring in his eyes. Hurt, confusion, but also a glimmer of something else. A deep, quiet understanding. Noah's mouth was a thin line, his gaze fixed on Daniel, unwavering. The tension in the room, rather than dissipating, had shifted, becoming something deeper, more profound. Daniel had finally spoken the truth, and now they both had to reckon with it. Unconditional care. Noah remained guarded, though a subtle softening around his jaw betrayed his internal shift as Daniel's voice wavered. The apartment, thick with unspoken anxieties, seemed to absorb all sound, amplifying the frantic rhythm of Daniel's own heart. He squeezed his eyes shut, a bitter yet liberating taste of confession on his tongue. When he reopened them, Noah's gaze, devoid of the anger Daniel had steeled himself for, met his with a deep, almost aching empathy. Daniel, Noah began, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through the quiet. I grasp that you've endured much, and I know I can't possibly fathom the true extent of what Mark inflicted upon you. He paused, each carefully chosen word landing with deliberate weight. But what I do feel, what I know with certainty, is that I care deeply for you, more than I probably should, considering everything. Daniel flinched, a knot tightening in his stomach. Noah, you don't have to. Let me finish, Noah interjected softly, raising a hand. I'm not demanding anything from you. I'm simply expressing my feelings. And I feel that you're vital to me. Your happiness, your well-being. They truly matter. He shifted, leaning forward slightly, his eyes holding Daniel's in a steady, unwavering hold. Whatever path you need to take, whatever solitude you require, I'll support it. If you need to withdraw, to process things on your own, I understand. Completely. I'm not leaving, not unless you tell me to. The raw honesty of Noah's declaration hit Daniel like a profound, disorienting tenderness, not a blow of pain. He had braced for fury, bewilderment, perhaps even heartbroken retreat. He had anticipated a struggle for comprehension, a need to justify his terror. Instead, Noah extended an open hand, a quiet understanding that bypassed all Daniel's defenses. It was too much, too good to be true. Noah. Daniel's voice was a mere whisper, thick with unshed tears. An overwhelming urge to bridge the distance between them warred with a paralysis born of Noah's sheer magnanimity. The grace felt undeserved, a gift too fragile to accept without fear of shattering it. There's no pressure, Daniel, Noah continued, his gaze unwavering. No expectations, just me, caring for you, that's all. He offered a small, almost wistful smile. Take your time. Absorb this. Whatever you decide, I'll be here. As a friend, if that's your need. Or more, if you ever feel ready. But that choice is yours, not mine. His words hung in the air, a balm to Daniel's frayed nerves, yet also a fresh source of disquiet. How could anyone be so unconditionally kind, so perceptive? It was an alien concept, a stark contrast to the transactional nature of his past relationships. He yearned to believe it, to surrender to it, but a deep-seated caution held him captive. A comfortable hush settled between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of city traffic. Daniel felt the weight of unspoken feelings, a complex tapestry of gratitude, guilt, and a burgeoning, terrifying hope. He watched Noah, who now leaned back, providing the promised space. The faint scent of cedar and something uniquely Noah, warm, inviting, permeated the air, a subtle reminder of the intimacy Daniel both craved and recoiled from. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel slowly pushed himself to his feet. I need to go, he managed, his voice still hoarse. I need to think. Noah nodded, rising with him. There was no argument, no plea to stay. Only gentle, understanding acceptance. Okay, Daniel, just drive safely and call me when you're ready, even if it's just to discuss the weather. Daniel met Noah's gaze one last time, a swirl of conflicting emotions battling within him. He wanted to apologize again, to elaborate, to simply remain. But the sheer intensity of Noah's unconditional care was almost suffocating. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since Mark's betrayal. Yet this time, the vulnerability stemmed not from hurt, but from a profound, unsettling love. He turned and walked out of Noah's apartment, the heavy door clicking softly shut behind him, leaving him to grapple with the overwhelming honesty of Noah's heart. A sleepless realization. The cool night air bit at Daniel's skin, a stark contrast to the clinging warmth of Noah's apartment, yet he barely registered the shift in temperature. His feet moved on autopilot, his mind a tempest, replaying Noah's parting words, the gentle sincerity in his gaze, the unwavering strength of his embrace. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel, not unless you truly want me to. The memory was a paradoxical comfort and a searing brand, soothing the ragged edges of his anxiety even as it etched a new terror into his soul. Not of Noah, but of the formidable depth of feeling Noah awakened within him. Back in his own apartment, the silence was absolute, a suffocating blanket. He didn't bother with lights. The street lamp's pale glow, diffused by blinds, offered sufficient navigation. He collapsed onto his bed, the sheets cool beneath him. But sleep remained an elusive dream. Every nerve ending thrummed with a restless energy that mirrored the turmoil in his chest as he tossed and turned, the mattress springs groaning in protest. He closed his eyes, and Noah's calm, reassuring face materialized, his voice a gentle echo. Daniel's mind scrolled through countless moments, a personal highlight reel of their shared history. He recalled the time, years ago, he'd cratered a crucial high school history exam, convinced parental disownment was imminent. Noah had found him then, holed up in their old treehouse, not with empty assurances, but with a shared bag of chips and a quiet, wordless understanding. It's not the end of the world, D, he'd stated simply. Just a really bad Tuesday. A ghost of a smile, a rare commodity these days, touched Daniel's lips at the memory. Then there was the period after his first deployment, when he'd returned, haunted by inarticulable shadows. He'd attempted to tough it out, to bury the nightmares beneath a mountain of stoicism. But Noah had seen past the facade, gently nudging him to speak, to unburden himself, to simply be. Daniel remembered evenings on Noah's porch swing, its rhythmic creak a soothing counterpoint to the quiet unraveling of his carefully constructed composure. Noah hadn't judged, hadn't offered facile solutions. He'd simply listened, a steadfast presence amidst the chaos. He had always seen Daniel, even when Daniel couldn't see himself. The boy beneath the bravado, the vulnerability beneath the soldier, the fear beneath the anger. And now he saw the love Daniel so desperately tried to deny. A sudden, jarring thought jolted him upright. His fear wasn't of Noah leaving, or of renewed heartbreak, or even of dependency. It was something far more fundamental, far more terrifying. It was of the sheer magnitude of his love for Noah. This love had blossomed organically, subtly, interwoven with every act of kindness, every shared laugh, every unspoken understanding. It felt less like an emotion and more like an intrinsic part of his being, as essential and undeniable as breath itself. This was not the volatile, passionate fire he'd mistaken for love with Mark. This was a deep, abiding warmth, a steady light that had guided him through the darkest valleys. It was the profound sense of coming home after a long, arduous journey. This realization, this pure, unadulterated truth, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't afraid of being dependent on Noah. He was terrified of how deeply he already was. He wasn't afraid of loving Noah. He was petrified of how much he already did. And that fear, that profound terror, stemmed from the agonizing belief that something so good, so pure, so essential, could be snatched away. He'd built formidable walls to shield himself from the pain of loss, inadvertently barricading the possibility of profound joy. The last vestiges of night receded, replaced by the first tentative hints of dawn, painting the sky in soft grays and nascent rose. As the light slowly seeped into his room, it seemed to penetrate the dark corners of his mind too. The churning in his gut began to subside, replaced by a quiet sense of clarity. The fear lingered, a faint whisper at the edge of his consciousness, but it was no longer a suffocating blanket. It was a challenge, an obstacle to be confronted, not a reason to retreat. He understood now. Noah's magnanimity wasn't a trap. It was a testament to his love. A love that mirrored Daniel's own. The hope that had felt so terrifying moments ago now felt like a fragile, precious thing, something to be nurtured, not feared. Daniel finally lay back down, not for sleep, but to breathe. For the first time in a very long time, a quiet, profound acceptance settled over him. The confession of love. The damp scent of a recent rain clung to Daniel's clothes as he approached Noah's building. Streetlights cast elongated, dancing shadows, and a fine mist softened the city's edges, mirroring the fragile hope blossoming in Daniel's mind. His heart thrummed a rapid rhythm against his ribs, a cascade of anticipation mingled with an old, familiar unease. Yet tonight, the trepidation felt different. Less a paralyzing dread, more an electric current, a tremor before a monumental plunge. He drew a deep breath, the cool air sharp in his lungs, and pushed open the heavy glass door. Ascending the stairs, each step was a deliberate commitment, finally stilling the insistent murmur of his internal debate. A warm, inviting glow emanated from beneath Noah's door. He paused, hand hovering, picturing Noah within, perhaps lost in a book, or simply lost in thought. A surge of affection, so potent it threatened to buckle his knees, swept over him. This was it. No more evasion, no more concealment. He knocked, a tentative tap, then a surer, more resolute rap. The shuffling within ceased. A click of the lock, and the door opened a crack. Noah peered out, his eyes widening in recognition. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Surprise, perhaps a flicker of apprehension given Daniel's recent emotional withdrawal. "Daniel?" Noah's voice was a soft question. Daniel pushed the door fully open and stepped inside, pulling it shut behind him. The air was a comforting embrace, hinting at brewing tea and worn books, a scent utterly synonymous with sanctuary. He looked at Noah, truly saw him, noting the weariness etched around his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. Daniel knew he was the architect of that fatigue, that strain. Guilt pricked him, a dull ache, but it was eclipsed by a fierce resolve. I needed to see you, Daniel began, his voice raspy, a little unsteady. He swallowed hard, trying to quell his nerves. This was far more difficult than he'd imagined, even after the fierce internal battles he'd waged. Noah simply watched, his gaze unwavering, patiently holding the space between them. He didn't interrupt, didn't prompt. He simply waited, a silent anchor in Daniel's storm. Daniel took another shaky breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of feeling, actually. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit. About everything. About us. He met Noah's gaze directly, allowing the torrent of unspoken emotions to bridge the distance. I've been so scared, Noah. Scared of needing someone so deeply again. Scared of losing it all. Scared of what it all meant. A ripple of understanding, of recognition, passed through Noah's eyes. He took a hesitant step closer, yet maintained a respectful space. But something shifted, Daniel continued, the words now flowing more easily, each one a release. It wasn't about the fear anymore, not really. It was about you. He took a step forward too, closing the small gap. It's always been you, hasn't it? Every time I've stumbled, you've been there. Every time I've needed a hand, you've offered it. You've seen me at my worst, and you still stayed. Noah's lips parted slightly, but no sound escaped. His eyes were wide now, a mixture of hope and profound tenderness welling within them. And I realized, Daniel pressed on, his voice gaining strength, conviction. I realized that what I was so afraid of, it wasn't dependency. It was love. It was this overwhelming, undeniable, terrifying love that I feel for you, Noah. The words hung in the air, a fragile, potent declaration. The silence that followed was thick, charged with emotion. Daniel watched Noah's face, his heart hammering, awaiting a reaction, a sign. Then, a tear tracked a path down Noah's cheek, and another. His lower lip trembled, and he let out a soft, shaky exhale that sounded like a sob of pure relief. He didn't speak, but his eyes, brimming with unshed tears, spoke volumes. They were alight with a joy so profound, it made Daniel's own eyes sting. I love you, Noah, Daniel repeated, his voice choked with his own burgeoning emotion. I am so completely, utterly, hopelessly in love with you. Noah let out a small, broken sound, a mixture of a gasp and a sob, and then he was moving. He closed the remaining distance in a single stride, his arms wrapping around Daniel's waist, pulling him into a fierce, desperate embrace. Daniel's arms went around Noah's shoulders, holding him just as tightly, burying his face in Noah's hair, inhaling his familiar, comforting scent. Noah's body shook against his, and Daniel felt the dampness of Noah's tears on his shirt. He held him, rocking them gently, a wave of profound peace washing over him, settling deep in his bones. The fear had dissipated, replaced by a warmth that permeated every fiber of his being. This was it. This was home. I love you too, Daniel, Noah whispered, his voice muffled against Daniel's chest, thick with emotion. God, I love you so much. The words were a balm, a confirmation, a promise. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, the world outside fading away. In that embrace, in the shared warmth and the quiet understanding, a new beginning unfurled, fragile but vibrant, full of the promise of a future built on honesty, acceptance, and a love that had finally found its voice.